Eddie Taveras, thank you so much for coming back. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So, going into next year, it's a different political situation down in Washington, D.C. We have Republicans taking control of the House, Democrats maintaining a slim majority in the Senate. For immigration reform, I don't really know what the story is on that. So, for the next 2 years, are we just going to see gridlock, or is there a possibility that something happens?
Yeah, so even before going into next year, we still have a session in a Congress that hasn't ended. And so we are working Forward.us in a month, and a bunch of other national and statewide organizations are working towards finding a solution and permanent protections for Dreamers and DACA recipients before the end of the year. And so this is a great opportunity because of Congress flipping in the House to make sure that we do live by our words and make sure that we provide a permanent protection and a pathway to citizenship for these dreamers who have been here for an average of 28 years.
On DACA, we've talked about that before. It's the Deferred Action on Childhood Arrivals program that was instituted under former President Obama, then taken away under President Trump. It's actually gone through a lot of different changes over the past decade. I mean, I don't remember when it was actually implemented, but what's the status of DACA right now?
Yeah, so it was a program that was implemented in 2012 and has been litigated through the courts throughout the years. Unfortunately, the courts have ruled that DACA is unconstitutional and is still battling for in the courts. And so we have a very small windows to ensure that DACA recipients, about 600,000 plus, of current DACA recipients and those that would otherwise have been eligible for the program to ensure that we create a pathway to citizenship. And, we have to either do this now or potentially face consequences and the risk of deportation and family separation that will come from an unfavorable ruling, which again, there's all the indications seems to go that way.
And that would have to be something done by Congress, correct? President Biden couldn't somehow revive it and change it to make it legal.
That is correct. Yeah. So they ruled on the constitutionality of executive authority on this, and so any nor Biden nor any other administration can do anything on this. This is solely up to Congress to fix. And it's been 10 years with folks that have DACA. It's been decades of folks who have been here and are, categorized as dreamers, and also the broader undocumented populations that have been here. And again, we haven't done any significant changes in our immigration law since Reagan was president.
Exactly. And, when we talk about things like a pathway to citizenship, like that program especially, I think, is something that has felt more out of reach than maybe a DACA. You may disagree with me, but I'm wondering over these next 2 years with Republicans in power in the House, is that just completely off the table, or is there a pathway to a pathway, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, so we have to be optimistic, given the fight that we are in. But yes, it does get much harder. The probability, are not in our favor, given that, the potentially next Speaker of the House, Representative Kevin McCarthy, has noted that he is not going to put any immigration bill on the floor. And so we have to take these people at their word for it, and particularly during this, political dynamic that people are going into the extremes. We want to make sure that in this Congress, before the end of the year, that we get something done that protects streamers and their families, right, who depend on them, their community members, employers, et cetera, that want them here to stay in their home, which is the only home that they've known.
I imagine it must be frustrating. I mean, Democrats have been in power in Congress and the White House for the past 2 years, haven't been able to do anything on DACA or a pathway to citizenship or any major immigration reform, as you mentioned. Why do you think this issue is so difficult to make progress on? I mean, I think that we see votes coming along very slowly from people, but why do you think that it's so much harder than maybe some other issues?
Yeah, I mean, this is a complete moral and ethical failure on Congress, right? Poll after poll shows that the American people, American voters, are supportive of a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, farm workers, and so on and so forth, and those who are undocumented. And they want to see Congress work in a bipartisan manner to pass this. And so they are essentially negating the will of the American people and the will of American voters who put them in power by not coming to a compromise and a solution that is, center on family, dignity, and the humanity of individuals.
Now, immigration is primarily a federal issue historically, but at the state level, we have done things that have benefited undocumented people and other immigrants coming into the country, for example, refugees. Do you see any issues coming up in New York next year, in next year's legislative session, that might be immigration related that you're watching?
Yeah, and I would know that these laws that we've passed in the state, as they, support and benefit immigrants, they've also supported the state in general, not just economically, but also culturally, in regards also to the diversity of like what makes New York State so amazing. For next year, we're looking at, two particular bills. One is the New York for All Act, which ensures that there is not a deportation pipeline and that adheres or contribute to the family separations that we've seen throughout the years, and particularly during the former administration. I think another great bill, and particularly as we're talking about an economy that is currently suffering from job shortages, is the Empire State Licensing Act, which would allow immigrants, but also undocumented immigrants, to gain access to occupational licensing and be able to participate in an economy, and also making sure that they have the appropriate and requirements to do those jobs. We want to make sure that their lack of not knowing English to the best of their abilities is not a hindrance in making sure that they can do that job, which again is much needed. And so it doesn't change the requirement, but it just makes sure that English is not a barrier if it's not a requirement for the job.
And we will be watching all of it. Eddie Taveras, Political Director of Immigration Campaigns at Forward.us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.